Welcome to the Research and Development Tax Incentive, or RDTI. In this presentation, we'll introduce you to the RDTI and discuss how you can self-assess your company's eligibility for the program and whether the activities you conducted are eligible R&D activities by using the Guide to Interpretation. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this presentation is being recorded, and the land on which you're watching this. Our department recognises the First Peoples of this nation and their ongoing connection to culture and country. We acknowledge First Nations peoples as the traditional owners, custodians, and lawkeepers of the world's oldest living culture and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples watching this presentation. Please note that the content in this presentation is general in nature. This means that if you follow this guidance, you are likely to meet the requirements of the program, but you need to consider the specific facts of your company and the R&D activities you are undertaking to self-assess your suitability for the program. You should reference the relevant online resources at business.gov.au or contact AusIndustry or the Australian Taxation Office directly for further guidance regarding the RDTI. We'll start with an overview of the RDTI before getting into the details of who is eligible and what activities can be registered under the program. We'll also walk through the evidence and records we expect you to keep related to your R&D, and what will happen if your RDTI registration is reviewed. We'll finish by highlighting some watch points and common errors, and then mention some additional resources that are available to support you to register for and claim the RDTI. So, what is the RDTI? It's a self-assessment program that encourages companies to conduct R&D activities that generate new knowledge for the benefit of the Australian economy. AusIndustry, which is part of the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, and the Australian Taxation Office, or ATO, are co-administrators of the program. AusIndustry assesses the eligibility of R&D activities, while the ATO assesses entities and the expenditure they claim to have incurred on the R&D activities they have undertaken. AusIndustry and the ATO work together to administer the program according to the legislated requirements. Either agency may review your application for registration. We'll discuss this in more detail towards the end of the presentation. Before we progress, please note that the meaning of an R&D activity and an R&D entity are specifically defined by the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997. When we refer to eligible R&D activities or eligible R&D entities, we're referring to activities and companies that meet the legal definitions. To apply for the RDTI, you need to be an eligible entity, conduct or intend to conduct at least one activity that meets the definition of core R&D activities, and have eligible annual R&D expenditure greater than 20,000 Australian dollars. If your eligible R&D expenditure is below 20,000 Australian dollars, you can still apply for the program if you use a registered research service provider to conduct your eligible R&D activities. The RDTI program offers R&D tax offset rates based on the size of the eligible entity, measured by aggregate turnover, and its eligible R&D expenditure. A refundable tax offset is available for R&D entities with an annual turnover of less than 20 million Australian dollars, while a non-refundable tax offset is available to R&D entities with an annual turnover of more than $20 million. Beyond these financial benefits, the program also provides an opportunity for companies to collaborate with research partners while encouraging growth and innovation. The RDTI provides a premium tax offset above the corporate tax rate for eligible expenditure up to a threshold of $150 million per year. This means that R&D expenditure above $150 million attracts an R&D offset equal to the company's corporate tax rate, and the premium rate is not applied to this portion of the expenditure. Now, Let's look at R&D tax offset rates available under the program. The R&D tax offset rate for entities with an aggregated turnover of less than 20 million Australian dollars changed for income years commencing on or after 1 July 2021. These R&D entities are now entitled to an R&D tax offset rate equal to their corporate tax rate, plus an 18.5% premium for expenditure incurred on R&D activities. For R&D activities conducted in income years that commenced before 1 July 2021, these R&D entities are entitled to an R&D tax offset rate of 43.5%. Now let's look at the R&D tax offset rate for entities with an aggregated turnover of $20 million or more. For income years that commenced on or after 1 July 2021, R&D entities are entitled to an R&D tax offset equal to their corporate tax rate, plus a premium based on the intensity of their R&D expenditure incurred on eligible activities. R&D intensity is a measure calculated by dividing the company's R&D expenditure by its total expenditure. There are two tiers of R&D intensity which impact the company's R&D tax offset rate under the RDTI. Companies with an R&D intensity of 0 to 2% will receive an 8.5% premium to their corporate tax rate, while companies with an R&D intensity greater than 2% will receive a 16.5% premium to their corporate tax rate. For R&D activities conducted in income years that commenced before 1 July 2021, R&D entities with a turnover of 20 million Australian dollars or more are entitled to a non-refundable R&D tax offset at a rate of 38.5%. Registering for the RDTI must be done annually following each income year you wish to claim the incentive. Once you check your company is an eligible entity and start planning your business activities for the next year, AusIndustry recommends that you start assessing whether the R&D activities you wish to undertake are likely to meet eligibility requirements. If you wish to claim R&D activities conducted overseas, you must ensure they are eligible by obtaining a mandatory overseas finding from AusIndustry before registering the activities and claiming them in your tax return. If you want assurance that any activities you are conducting or plan to conduct are eligible R&D activities before registering them, you can apply for an advance finding from AusIndustry. An advance finding is not mandatory, but provides certainty on whether your planned R&D activities meet the requirements of the program before you actually apply to register them. You will need to keep relevant records generated before, during, and after you conduct the activities. Your record should demonstrate how the activities you plan to register for the RDTI meet the requirements for eligible R&D activities and show the expenditure you incurred on those activities. Before applying to register your R&D activities with AusIndustry, you should again check that they meet the requirements for the program. If your company and activities are eligible, you must apply to register for the program with AusIndustry within 10 months of the end of the income year in which the R&D activities were conducted. When AusIndustry registers your application, your company will be provided with an RDTI registration number. You will then enter this number in the R&D schedule of the company's annual income tax return before lodging it with the ATO. Receiving a registration number from AusIndustry does not mean that your R&D activities have been reviewed or that your activities meet requirements. A registration number means that your application has been received and is complete. AusIndustry or the ATO may choose to review your registration at a later date. Now we'll discuss how you can self-assess your company's eligibility for the program. As noted at the start of this presentation, the Guide to Interpretation is the key resource to help you understand and assess whether your company and its R&D activities are eligible for the program. You can access and download the guide at business.gov.au/RDTI. The content in the guide reflects the way AusIndustry applies the legislation and will help you self-assess and answer 4 key questions related to your eligibility. They are: am I an eligible R&D entity? Is my R&D eligible? What expenditure did I incur on R&D activities? And do I have records and evidence to support my claim? It also contains an interactive tool to help you self-assess your eligibility for the program, with links to further information about key terms and definitions. Now let's explore details about eligible entities and activities further. To claim the RDTI, you first need to assess whether you're eligible to register as an R&D entity. You can find the definition of an R&D entity in Section 355 of the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997. A corporation incorporated under Australian law can be an R&D entity, as can a business or company incorporated under a foreign law that is an Australian resident. Other corporations incorporated under a foreign law may also qualify as an R&D entity under certain conditions. For more about the requirements for R&D entities, visit ato.gov.au/RDTI or contact the ATO on 132 866 to discuss your specific circumstances. The RDTI provides a tax incentive for eligible R&D activities that you conduct and register as part of a project. Even if the main focus of your business or project is research and development, it may be that some of the activities you conduct are not R&D activities that are eligible for the program. For example, you may undertake activities to commercialise your R&D outcomes. These would not be eligible for the R&D tax offset. It's your responsibility to assess whether specific individual activities within your R&D project are R&D activities that meet the legislative requirements of the RDTI. For expenditure incurred on your R&D activities to be eligible for a RDTI offset, you must conduct or intend to conduct at least one core R&D activity. Ensure your core R&D activity is not excluded from being a core R&D activity. We'll talk about excluded activities later. Register or intend to register your core R&D activity. Only register supporting R&D activities that directly relate to a core R&D activity. Section 355-25 of the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997 defines core R&D activities as experimental activities whose outcome can't be known or determined in advance on the basis of current knowledge, information, or experience, but can only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work that is based on principles of established science and proceeds from hypothesis to experiment, observation and evaluation, and leads to logical conclusions. Core R&D activities must also be conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge. For an activity to be a core R&D activity, a competent professional in the field can't know, predict, or determine the outcome of the activity based on current knowledge, experience, or information that is publicly available anywhere in the world. We expect you to search worldwide for an existing way to achieve your outcome before you start your R&D activity and to keep records to show you did this. For example, you may review scientific, technical, or professional literature, carry out internet searches, conduct patent searches, or seek advice from an expert or experts. A competent professional in the field is taken to mean a person who can access all available knowledge, skills, and experience in the field that relates to your R&D. Once you assess whether the outcome of your R&D activities could not be known or determined in advance, the next test is whether the outcome of your R&D activities could only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work based on the principles of established science. Your core R&D activity may progress over several income years, and you may conduct one or more elements of your systematic progression of work in one income year. But all elements of the required systematic progression of work need to be undertaken to be an eligible R&D activity. In your application for registration, we expect you to explain when and how your activities proceed from one element to the next, and how they meet the definition of core R&D activities. You also need to keep relevant records to show your systematic progression of work. Let's look more closely at each element in the required systematic progression of work. Your hypothesis is your idea or proposed explanation for how you could achieve a particular result. You need to develop it before you start your R&D activities, as it will guide your investigation. Your hypothesis can be expressed in a single statement or in several statements that set out what you plan to do and why. We expect you to explain what result you aim to test and how and why you think you can achieve it, informed by your background research. In doing so, you may also explain how or why the result may not be achievable. If we review your registration, we expect to see evidence showing how your background research helped develop your hypothesis. Importantly, you need to be able to test your hypothesis through one or more experiments you conduct to determine the outcome of your core R&D activities. If you do not need to conduct an experiment to prove or disprove your hypothesis, then the activity can't be a core R&D activity. An experiment is a scientific procedure that you undertake to test your hypothesis, observe what happens, and compare this to what you expect. You may also compare your results to those from previous experiments. We expect you to explain how you conduct or plan to conduct your experiment. You may group a series of experiments in one core R&D activity if each aims to test the same technical or scientific idea. Experiments can take place in many environments, from laboratories to process plants, offices, or farms. You may get the result you expect, or you may get a different result. Either way, your R&D activities may still be eligible for the RDTI. Experiments can also take on many forms and may vary between industries and organisations. Regardless, they must aim to test a hypothesis as part of a systematic progression of work undertaken for the purpose of generating new knowledge to be R&D activities for the RDTI. Observation is where you observe, measure, and record information and results related to your experiment. This information can be qualitative or quantitative. Evaluation is where you assess and analyse the results of your experiments. You need to consider what the results of your experiment mean, and we expect your records to show that you evaluated the results of your experiment to understand why and how you achieved or didn't achieve your desired outcome. You should analyse how or why something occurs and explain your insights through description. Any data analysis should be done using established techniques. We also expect you to evaluate causal relationships in your experiment. As the final step in your systematic progression of work, you need to form logical conclusions about why your results support or do not support your hypothesis. As a result of your experiment and observations, you might need to investigate different solutions and test a new hypothesis. You could then test a new hypothesis through new experiments, which may be similar enough to include as part of the same core R&D activity. Alternatively, they may be different and need to be part of a new, different core R&D activity. To be an eligible core R&D activity for the program, one of your substantial purposes for conducting the activity needs to be generating new knowledge. This new knowledge can be general or applied. For example, it may be a new theoretical or practical understanding of a subject, or it may be a new or improved material, product, device, process, or service. It's understood that R&D activities may not always be successful, and that experiments may not achieve expected outcomes. If this is the case, your activities may still meet the requirements for R&D activities. There are a range of activities that are excluded from being core R&D activities for the RDTI. Before registering, you should first check if any of your activities are excluded from being a core R&D activity. Specifically excluded activities that can't be core R&D activities under the RDTI are listed in subsection 2 of section 355-25 of the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997 and explained in the Guide to Interpretation. Activities excluded from being core R&D activities may, however, be eligible as supporting R&D activities, which we'll discuss shortly. Let's look at some of these excluded activities now. To begin with, market research, testing and development, and sales promotion, including consumer surveys, can't be core R&D activities under the RDTI. These activities may, however, be eligible as supporting R&D activities if their dominant purpose is to support your core R&D activity. Prospecting, exploring, or drilling for minerals or petroleum are excluded from being core R&D activities if they are being conducted for the purposes of discovering deposits, determining more precisely the location of deposits, or determining the size or quality of deposits. If you conduct these activities for other purposes, they may be eligible as core R&D activities. For example, it could be that you are conducting R&D activities to develop a new tool or new process used in prospecting, exploring, or drilling. If these activities meet all of the requirements for R&D activities, they could still be eligible for the incentive. As with the previous category of market research activities, prospecting, exploring, or drilling activities may be supporting R&D activities if their dominant purpose is to support your core R&D activity. The next category of activities excluded from being core R&D activities are management studies or efficiency surveys. This includes collecting and evaluating information to help you make decisions about the operations of your business or any other business. This includes studies or surveys you conduct to measure or evaluate data. For example, the energy efficiency of a business, productivity of employees, or time and cost-saving measures for a business. However, the exclusion does not include studies or surveys you conduct as part of a systematic progression of work. Activities involving experimental or non-experimental research in the social sciences, arts, or humanities are excluded from being core R&D activities. When assessing your activities, you should consider whether you are conducting research in these areas where this exclusion is likely to apply: anthropology, business, classics, communication studies, dance, economics, education, fine art, geography, history, literature, music, performing arts, philosophy, politics, psychology, sociology, theatre, visual arts. This list is not definitive, and you should consider your individual circumstances and research activities when assessing their eligibility as core R&D activities. Commercial, legal, and administrative activities associated with patenting, licensing, or other intellectual property activities are excluded from being core R&D activities. This includes commercial, legal, and administrative activities you conduct to gain rights to use or access IP from another party, grant rights to another party to use or access your IP, negotiate an IP sharing agreement, negotiate non-disclosure agreements, research, prepare, and file an application to protect your IP. It may be that the activities conducted to generate new IP are R&D activities. However, this is not always the case. The activities must meet all criteria, including having an unknown outcome, and involve a systematic progression of work. Forms of IP protection that are excluded from being core R&D activities include designs, domain names, patents, plant breeders' rights, trademarks, your know-how, or proprietary knowledge. The next category of exclusion is activities conducted to meet a requirement or standard contained in legislation. This includes activities that a regulator directs you to conduct to demonstrate legislative compliance. Activities this exclusion covers includes those you conduct where required by legislation to show compliance with national standards, Calibrate a secondary standard with reference to a primary standard. Routinely test for compliance of your materials, components, products, or processes. Routinely test soils, atmospheres, wastewater, and other things for compliance with a legislative requirement, such as requirements for environmental protection. If you conduct R&D activities and need to meet legal requirements on how you conduct your R&D activities, this does not exclude them from being core R&D activities. Activities covered by this exclusion can be supporting R&D activities if they are directly related to a core R&D activity and the dominant purpose is to support your core R&D activity. Any activity related to the reproduction of a commercial product or process is also excluded from the RDTI. This includes reverse engineering and other activities you conduct to obtain documents that tell you how a product or process works or how to produce it, analyse a sample of a product to gain information about how to make the product, or collect data about the operating parameters of a production process so that you can replicate the process. Activities to gather information about an existing product or process may be supporting R&D activities if they are directly related to and have the dominant purpose of supporting your core R&D activity. Finally, developing, modifying, or customizing computer software is excluded from being a core R&D activity when conducted for the dominant purpose of use by any of the following entities for their internal administration, including the internal administration of their business functions. The entity, the developer for which the software is developed, modified, or customized. An entity connected with the developer, or an affiliate of the developer, or an entity of which the developer is an affiliate. Activities that you conduct to develop, modify, or customize computer software include those to design software, write new or existing code, test software, and customize an off-the-shelf software package. If your dominant purpose is to use the software to administer your entity's or an affiliate entity's business, then activities you conduct to develop, modify, or customize that software can't be core R&D activities. Such activities may be eligible supporting activities if they are directly related to and have the dominant purpose of supporting your core R&D activity. This exclusion does not apply to activities you conduct to develop, modify, or customize software for a dominant purpose other than internal business administration. Now that we've looked at those activities excluded from being core R&D activities, let's summarise the process of determining whether your activities meet the requirements for being eligible core R&D activities that we've covered so far. First, you need to determine whether your core R&D activity meets the legislative requirements. The first step in this process is to confirm that the outcome of your core R&D activity can't be known or determined in advance on the basis of current knowledge, information, or experience. You then confirm that the outcome of your core R&D activity can only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work, and confirm that your systematic progression of work proceeds from hypothesis to experiment and all the way through to logical conclusions. Finally, you need to confirm that the core R&D activity is being conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge. If the activity meets these requirements and is not an excluded activity as outlined in the legislation, you then assess that the activity meets the legal definition and requirements for a core R&D activity under the program. Remember that even if your R&D is not successful and your outcome was not achieved, your activities may still be eligible if the activities meet all legislative requirements and were conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge. It is understood that R&D activities may not always be successful in resolving scientific or technological unknowns, but may still meet the requirements of the program. Now we'll look at the second category of R&D activities under the RDTI, supporting R&D activities. After you assess that you conducted or plan to conduct at least one core R&D activity, you can assess whether you conducted or plan to conduct any activities that meet the definition of supporting R&D activities. Supporting R&D activities are defined in the legislation as activities that are directly related to core R&D activities. However, if an activity is excluded by the legislation from being a core R&D activity or produces goods or services, or is directly related to producing goods or services, the activity can only be a supporting R&D activity if it is also conducted for the dominant purpose of supporting your core R&D activities. Dominant purpose means your prevailing or most influential purpose. This means your main purpose for conducting an excluded activity or an activity that produces goods or services, or one that is directly related to producing goods or services, must be to support a core R&D activity. The Guide to Interpretation provides further points of consideration for determining the dominant purpose of an activity. You need to identify the core R&D activity that your supporting R&D activity relates to and identify the relationship of the activity with your systematic progression of work. We expect you to identify and record what the relationship is when you conduct your activities and to explain what that relationship is when you apply to register your activities for the program. Supporting R&D activities can be conducted before, during, or after your core R&D activity. When you plan your R&D, you may schedule different activities over several years. You may also have several supporting R&D activities for each core R&D activity. Examples of supporting R&D activities include a literature review to refine your hypothesis before conducting an experiment, cleaning and maintaining equipment you use during experiments, decommissioning equipment used in experiments after you have reached your logical conclusions. Let me walk you through an example of when an excluded activity could be a supporting activity. Aussie Bugs is developing Moreton Bay bugs with certain characteristics for export to China through selective breeding. It conducted research into the preferences of the Chinese market. As mentioned, market research is excluded from being a core R&D activity and can only be considered a supporting R&D activity if its dominant purpose is to support a core R&D activity. Aussie Bugs assessed its reasons for conducting the research into market preferences and concluded that its dominant purpose, that is, the prevailing or most influential purpose, was to support the core R&D activity of selective breeding. Without knowing these preferences, the company could not have designed the experiments to generate the knowledge of if and how to breed the preferences into the bugs. A further supporting activity was maintaining the tanks that contained the bugs used for experiments. The bugs grown in these tanks didn't have a commercial purpose and were only used for experimentation. Remember, this is an example only. Whether you conduct an activity to directly support a core R&D activity that also meets the dominant purpose test for an excluded activity, or one that is conducted for producing goods or services or related to producing goods or services, will depend on your specific circumstances. We expect you to analyse and explain your circumstances and keep evidence to support your claim. Determinations can provide certainty on the eligibility of R&D activities. In 2021, legislative changes gave the Industry Innovation and Science Australia Board the power to make determinations. Determinations are a notifiable instrument that set out how program administrators will interpret and apply the law in relation to the R&D tax incentive program. Determinations can, for example, provide assurance that activities covered by a determination meet the requirements and are eligible for the RDTI. A determination that is in force is binding on Industry Innovation and Science Australia, except in certain circumstances, such as a review of a reviewable decision. In this way, determinations provide both program users and program administrators with certainty. This enhancement to the RDTI's program administration helps companies to more confidently plan and register their R&D activities. It also streamlines application and compliance processes, as companies only need to demonstrate that they fit within the determination rather than providing detailed information about the activities they are undertaking. The RDTI's very first determination states that certain Phase 0, 1, 2, 3, pre-market pilot stage and pre-market pivotal stage clinical trials for an unapproved therapeutic good are core R&D activities for the purposes of the R&D tax incentive. This determination commenced on the 1st of April 2022, and additional determinations will be developed. You can find out more about determinations and how to complete your application form when relying on a determination at business.gov.au. Let's now discuss evidence and record keeping. AusIndustry and the ATO monitor and review applications for the RDTI. AusIndustry may check whether the activities that you register are eligible, and the ATO may review the R&D expenditure you claim. Both AusIndustry and the ATO work together closely to administer the RDTI, and either agency may ask the other to conduct a review. Record keeping is a key part of managing your business and your R&D. Applicants who keep records of the activities they conduct, the expenditure on their activities, and the connection between their activities can support their claims with evidence. We expect you to make and keep records before or around the time you conduct your activities. These will be the strongest evidence of your R&D activities. If we review your registration, we will ask you for evidence that shows how you conducted or plan to conduct core R&D activities, whose outcome can't be known or determined in advance on the basis of current knowledge, information, or experience worldwide, whose outcome can only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work, that are based on principles of established science, that are conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge, and that are not excluded from being core R&D activities. We also expect you to keep records of activities that you register or plan to register for the RDTI. You should also keep records of how your supporting R&D activities directly relate to at least one core R&D activity, and, in some cases, that you conduct them for the dominant purpose of supporting a core R&D activity. In your records of your systematic progression of work, we expect to see details of how you develop your hypothesis, design your experiment, observe and record experiment results, evaluate your results, and reflect on conclusions about your results. For example, do they support your hypothesis or generate other new knowledge? If we review your registration, you can use different sorts of records and evidence to support an assessment that your activities are eligible R&D activities. Evidence can include written records, oral statements, and expert opinions. As noted previously, we expect you to make and keep records before or around the time you conduct your activities, and those written records will be the strongest evidence of your R&D activities. Broadly, you should be able to demonstrate that you have an idea about a new or improved material, product, device, process, or service, and the outcome of your R&D activities could not be determined or known in advance. Your evidence needs to show you conducted or are planning to conduct R&D activities to test this idea. Examples could include, but are not limited to, a business case, contracts, or research arrangements, patent and other searches, project approvals or meeting minutes, or records of test results and analysis. Records of your systematic progression of work can be made at each stage of the process. Examples could include email correspondence, lab notebooks, process diagrams, project reports and test reports that show results and analysis of experiments. Finally, records to show that the purpose of conducting your core R&D activity is to generate new knowledge may include annual reports, ASX announcements, board minutes, contracts, email correspondence, and project plans. Refer to the Guide to Interpretation for an extended list of document examples that can support the eligibility of your activities. Evidence to show how your supporting R&D activities directly relate to at least one core R&D activity could include annual financial reports, business plans that describe your supporting R&D activities, plans that predate the start of your supporting R&D activities, prior year claims, and technical project documents. When we examine your registration or application for the RDTI, we will ask for evidence to show you have conducted, are conducting, or are planning to conduct eligible R&D activities. We will assess your activities on the evidence you provide and may also conduct our own research, including speaking with technical staff you employ or contract. We may also seek our own expert opinion. If we examine your registration, our procedures will be fair and allow you to comment on information we find during our own research. This ensures you have the opportunity to advise us whether any information we rely on to make a decision is incorrect. Our assessment will be based on the legal requirements of the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997 and the Industry Research and Development Act 1986. And we will work with you to ensure you have the opportunity to provide evidence to support your claim. If you are unable to provide evidence to support your claim, we may find that you didn't conduct or plan to conduct eligible R&D activities. We see a number of errors, and there are watch points to be aware of when applying for the RDTI. Firstly, the RDTI does not necessarily fund entire projects. When conducting an R&D project, some of the activities you conduct may not be R&D activities. The RDTI only supports expenditure incurred on core R&D activities and supporting R&D activities. Sections 355-25 and 355-30 of the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997 provide the definitions for core and supporting activities respectively. The Guide to Interpretation provides further guidance to help you self-assess your activities, which must meet all the requirements of this legislation to be eligible for the RDTI. Some applicants don't describe their activities in enough detail, and it's unclear whether their activities meet the requirements or not. Applicants who lodge their application through a third-party RDTI consultant or use a research service provider sometimes assume that this guarantees eligibility for the program. This is not necessarily the case. Eligibility is achieved by adhering to the legislation and meeting the definitions of an R&D entity and R&D activities, and claiming only the expenditure that is incurred on R&D activities. Just because something has not been done before does not necessarily mean that its outcome is unknown or unknowable. It may be that existing knowledge was applied to create that new knowledge, or experiments were not required to determine an outcome. When lodging your application, you need to explain why the outcome of your core R&D activity could not have been known or determined in advance, and keep relevant records as evidence. Both AusIndustry and the ATO are here to support you in applying for the RDTI. While the Guide to Interpretation is the primary guide to explain key terms of the RDTI, additional sector-specific guidance and case studies are available online at business.gov.au/RDTI. Sectors with individual guides available on the website include agri-food, biotechnology, built environment, energy, manufacturing, and software development. For more information about the Income Tax Assessment Act eligible expenditure that may be claimed under the RDTI, visit the ATO website at ato.gov.au/RDTI. We encourage you to review the Guide to Interpretation in detail as you plan your R&D, assess your eligibility, and prepare your application for registration. Thank you for listening. Remember that while the RDTI is a self-assessment program, your application may be subject to review and examination. AusIndustry and the ATO are available to provide support if you need it.